in terms of the efficacy of a Tomahawk missile, if you put this in the hands of the Ukrainians, could it in fact reach Moscow? What type of damage would it do, and what would be the impact on the war?
Sure, yeah. Great to be back again, and because you have empirical viewers, let's start with just the facts.
Super.
The Tomahawk, the way it works is it does have the range characteristics where fired from either in the air, can go further, or from the ground, not as far, but either firing trajectory would mean that it could reach strategically important targets in and around Moscow and other centers. This is why Putin really needs to try to declare a new red line. What is we up to, like his 20th red line?
Maybe,
who knows? Yeah. But that's the real efficacy of it, its range.
Yep.
The other key factor isn't just that it can go far with a big boom, it's how it actually flies. So the Tomahawk is amazing because this is actually old 80s technology.
Yeah, right.
It actually flies based upon digital maps it creates the terrain beneath it. So this means it actually is less susceptible to GPS jamming because it's following its own almost version of terrain recognition. That also means it can fly lower than some radars can pick it up.
Okay.
So a Tomahawk is designed to fly long distances, to stay low to the ground, and then to pop up and hit the target so the defender has less time to react. That's why it's such a disturbing weapon for the Russians and so effective for the Ukrainians.
Would we have to also provide a delivery system, or could this be delivered by boat, by ground, by aircraft that Ukraine already has?
You know, Ukraine is second only to MacGyver in its ability to make battlefield improvisation. So I have no doubt the Ukrainians would find a way to fire it, even if we somehow forgot to deliver it, which our military is good, we wouldn't. The bigger question is how much intelligence would you pass with it? Are you helping train the flight profiles and routes? This has been an issue with Scout missiles in the past. So Tomahawk is a cruise missile. European countries have given other cruise missiles to the Ukrainians in the past. So you're right, it does come with a support package. It's not just you buy it off the shelf, you take it home and use it. You have to think about that intelligence package, and then also how are you firing it.
Okay, let's talk inventories. President Trump, who was open to this idea a couple of days ago, says, hey, we need them too, and we cannot deplete. Do we have a sense of how many we have?
So not as readily as you think. Usually, you know, defense wonks like myself spend time like looking at congressional budgets to see how many were ordered and how many were bought. And then sometimes we don't get accurate numbers on the number shot in terms of actual strikes on an enemy, or much less in training. So what we do know is this is a high demand asset, right? You always hear that term. It's why it's ubiquitous now to say Tomahawk, which means there's never enough. And the bigger issue we have is that we just can't produce many of these missiles at the large enough quantities and in a timely manner, especially when we're confronted with the world where one day we might fire a Tomahawk from a destroyer to hit a Houthi, the next day we might give it to Ukrainian to shoot something in Russia, but then the following day we all of a sudden need to fire 1,000 of them in the defense of a treaty ally like the Philippines or Japan because of the Taiwan scenario.
Okay, so you mentioned Yemen, by the way. We've popped off a lot of these at Yemen, and they come at what, $1 million a pop?
Yeah, prices vary. And remember the way the defense contracts work, it isn't just as simple. You have to go for an average, $1 million a pop on average, but it depends on the block. And so my guess is we're probably going to give older inventory, lower block item Tomahawks to the Ukrainians to fire. Ones that we would be kind of like we did with some of the ATACMs that were nearing the end of their service life. So it's still an amazing missile. That's not to discount its power. But we're not going to be giving them the latest block that is more advanced and has maybe even some other features that would be of interest.
Could it change the strategy for Ukraine? Could it break this war of attrition, or would this just be an opportunity to provide a deterrent for Vladimir Putin? How would it be employed?
I tend to look at this, and this is where I think something is happening that's more interesting than gets credit in the Trump administration. I think that they're actually having what I would call a compounding coercive campaign right now. So the Tomahawks are actually a powerful deterrent and a powerful negotiating mechanism, even if not a single one enters Ukraine. Now Vladimir Putin has to reckon with the Americans can give the Ukrainians something that can hit targets with a bigger boom than the long-range drones attacks that are hitting Russian oil refineries. That is taken as compounding, because now think of the economic side. We've got the Indian oil dynamics going on. We've got this new call for a victory tariff to further hit Chinese support to Russia. We've got existing sanctions. We've got EU calls to create really interesting, like structured financial products, like essentially loans off Russian frozen assets. And we even have a bill in the U.S. Where we would essentially take, I think it's about $6 billion, it's a few $billions of Russian frozen assets and give it to the Ukrainians. So I actually see the economic dimensions of that coercive campaign as more deterrent than the individual Tomahawk delivery, but you can't separate them. I think the Trump team has developed a pretty sophisticated notion of this compounding coercive signal to try to really put the hard press on Putin in the wake of Gaza to then kind of put at least freeze the conflict, if not outright end it.
Fascinating. It's a great theory, and it makes a lot of sense. And I wonder, when you consider the hot spots around the world, the amount of munitions that we're providing and using, there was fascinating analysis from Colonel Sanders at Bloomberg Intelligence, who sits right in the newsroom with us and was out with a client note talking about a potential re-rating of the major defense contractors based on the massive orders for missiles specifically that are going to be coming. Tomahawk is a Lockheed product. Who makes it?
Well, remember, the weirdest part about most of these is because after that famous thing you call the Last Supper in defense, where you went from a lot of firms to a few firms, it's never as simple as
everyone makes everything here. Like it takes every company to make something, right?
And never think about a missile as just a missile. A missile is a series of component parts, from a rocket engine to a guidance system to a warhead to avionics to a command and control suite. So usually the really interesting way to look at these weapon systems, and especially for Bloomberg watchers, as you're thinking about this, from how do you make bets upon the possibility of protracted conflict or the recapitalization of the American industrial base, you really have to look at it at that angle.
Fascinating.
Then you start making very different bets, because it turns out probably in a couple years we're probably going to have more rocket motors than we need, but we might not have as many drones as we need.
Wow.
And so you have to start to look carefully at what companies, who are their contracts, who are their suppliers. You then got to throw in weird curveballs like this whole critical mineral thing and the magnets. So it's never just as simple as Boeing or a Lockheed or a Northrop, all of whom make phenomenal weapons. It's what part of the end item do they make, and then where do we understand those supply chains? And because of that complexity, that's why it's so hard to recapitalize the defense industrial base.
What a great answer. So it sounds like for the investor, you might be looking at a basket. You're buying the industry, maybe more than individual names. But where do the Andurils come into play here, and some of the other smaller, more nimble, more innovative defense contractors they're being profiled on 60 Minutes as the next big thing? Will that in fact change procurement at the Pentagon? Unmanned drone, whether it's air or water?
Who knows? I mean, in some sense,
you don't seem impressed at all.
So I'm impressed with some of their stuff, but I'll be more impressed when they have multiple factories that are mass producing.
Understood. It's about scale for you.
Yeah, it's about scale. And I also think a lot of the defense primes, despite the inefficiencies of federal procurement processes, a lot of our actually large primes are actually some of the most innovative companies you can find. It's American firms with DARPA that invent this thing called stealth. It's American firms actually working with DARPA researchers that invent the internet. So I have yet to see any small, amazing, disruptive company that has something as disruptive as stealth aircraft or the internet.
Really interesting.
What I do see, though, is that their willingness to create a more competitive, kind of Schumpeterian creative destruction landscape. So if nothing else, even if a lot of these new defense companies end up failing and failing tragically, they've at least forced interesting debates and energy, which is exactly what we want in capitalism. So I think they're serving a really important function. I think some of them will do amazing work, but don't discount some of the amazing stuff that these larger defense firms make.